This is the Walter Bacon podcast where I highlight some of the most practical and game-changing B2B AI startups. Today I'm with my friend Matthieu Hafemeister. He's the CEO and co-founder of Concourse AI. And Concourse provides AI agents that enable corporate finance teams to automate manual work and reclaim valuable time for more high-impact strategic work. So Matthieu, it's great to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on a few things. I heard it's your biggest deal ever signed in January, that you achieved 19 times more revenue than the year before, and that you received Series A funding of 12 million in January 2026. So congrats on all that.
Thank you. Yeah, those are some big milestones and capping off a really good 2025. And we've already got some really good milestones in 26 as well with the new office and some new big logos. So it's been fun.
Well, let's get right into the problem that you're solving.
Yeah, so really we deal with the kind of biggest pain point that lives within finance, which is the dichotomy between traditional software and sort of flexibility in spreadsheets. And I think when you talk to most finance teams, and this certainly was our experience at our previous company, making decisions in finance is sort of oftentimes very, very painful to really kind of get down to the brass tacks of what's happening between sort of data and information that lives within software that's very static and spreadsheets and information that are flexible but create no automation. And agents really create that sort of middle gap of being able to be extremely flexible and interacted through natural language, as well as the automation of connectivity to systems. And our goal is to help finance teams and companies make better decisions, faster decisions, and really drive impact through AI adoption.
Interesting. So I heard you talk about the way data is in so many different places and different applications. The
Yeah.
time wasted that finance teams use mostly is in pulling the data together. That's a very manual task. How do you guys address that?
Yeah, so that is probably the crux of like every finance team is, I need to understand, how my business is doing. I need to understand my revenue, my customers, and, kind of the cost structure. That data lives in all of these different systems. It lives in an ERP, it lives in a CRM, it lives in a billing system, it lives in a payroll solution. There's product data in a data warehouse. There's treasury data in a treasury system or banks. And so like that, all of that information oftentimes doesn't talk to each other. Or if it talks to each other, it's extremely unflexible in terms of giving you the insights of why these things are happening to really drive the business forward. And so what we do at Concourse, and we spent a lot of time, sort of when we first started the company, is building out these integrations to these systems, right? Connectivity to all the main ERPs, connectivity to billing systems, to CRMs, to data warehouses, and really making it easy for customers to connect that data into Concourse and for our agents to, accurately retrieve information from those systems to automate workflows. And so that has been, I think, from the beginning of where we started Concourse, really that connectivity to systems has been one of our strong suits. And that means that today, we can implement Concourse in a customer in, a matter of hours. And that really is critical, especially at the enterprise level where we've found really great success, is we don't rip and replace any systems, right? There's no migration of software, there's no implementations, right? A lot of that is handled by our connectivity to those systems. And now we get to really build agents when you get to think about workflows. And that's like the really fun part of what we're able to do.
Cool. Talking about the workflows, so you have some like pre-made workflows that are used commonly. So can you talk about those?
Yeah, so workflows are extremely extendable, right? And we sort of kind of cross the gamut between accounting workflows and helping teams sort of close books, and so everything that's related to creating journal entries, right? And automating that, variance analyses, anomaly detections, the flux, the vendor analyses, AR aging, all of that data that comes from so the transaction, the granularity of an ERP. Those are all very, very common workflows. Strategic finance teams are also probably one of the largest sort of segments of users in Concourse, and so we think through strategic questions around customer insights and data. We think through BVAs and forecasting and benchmarking, and so a lot of the questions that strategic finance teams really have around thinking about the business critically and where the growth levers are, we help them cover those insights. We help them find new information behind their business, discover these new things, and really make those decisions much faster. And then we have some really interesting applications at the sort of like, APAR side of the world, treasury, revenue, sort of, finance. So it really can be pretty broad and extendable. Typically, we try and come in with like one clear use case, really demonstrate value, have our agents, provide the sort of leverage and ROI that the teams are looking for. And then teams are like, great, let's add more data, let's bring in more agents, and let's really scale that. And that's a lot of sort of the story and the, sort of the patterns that we see across our customers.
Cool. What about chatting with your data?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say like maybe, and when we first started Concourse, that certainly was a big draw, right? In terms of getting adoption and getting folks on board. I have this very complex NetSuite instance, and I want to chat with it, and it's really hard for me to even like look at my top 10 vendors over the last 3 months and create a chart. Like that takes me an hour, and now Concourse can do that in 30 seconds, right? So certainly that is part of the value prop of Concourse. We have the ability to chat with that data, right? And across systems, which I think is really, again, where the insights live, right? Not just the one system, but across multiple. So chatting with your data is certainly how teams interact with Concourse and sort of come in. I think that's kind of like level one today, right? And I think what's really exciting for our customers and the sort of forward-thinking finance teams is the workflow automation, right? How do I take this, process that I have, this recurring monthly report, right? These, reconciliations, closing the books, this, updating of invoices. Like, how do I sort of have agents do that, run in the background, ping me in places where I'm working, my email, my Slack, other parts, and really sort of automate and really create efficiencies from that perspective. So I think the workflow is sort of a lot more of like our kind of like leaning indicator today of like teams really getting value from Concourse. Sure, you can chat with your data and that's valuable and that helps saves time, but the workflow is what really kind of moves you in that next direction. That's how the best teams are thinking about agents as part of their org chart, right? They're owning full end-to-end workflows. They're driving value. They're making decisions on the back of that, and that is, I think, sort of the driving force that's been, for like the last few months on Concourse, and I think a big part of our story this year.
Nice. I heard you talk about 10 times more productivity. Is that about the measure, or is it can go up or down from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much like the benchmark that we look for. I think we certainly have done that and more in many of our customers, right? I think the way that I like to think about this is agents are just fundamentally different than software, right? And software is always about, sort of think the 10, 20% productivity gains, right? But a human person still needs to, implement that software, certainly, right? Maintain that software, especially as it gets complex, and then operate the software, right? Click the buttons, build out the sort of flows that are required. Oftentimes that software is very generic, right? It's sort of, sort of like mass produced software. And so your specific workflow or your specific sort of nuances of your business, like don't always fit in the buttons, right, that the development team had. And if you need another button or another sort of flow, you have to ask them. They have to build it. They have to prioritize
Mhm.
it. So it's just a very archaic way, I think, of operating a business. And they're really fun, and that's why the productivity gains in software are there, and that's why those people make, why we make investments in software and we sort of build and buy those. But I think agents really produce a completely new way of interacting with that data, and it's a very much of a new direction, right? And the fun part there is like I don't have to go sit there and build out all of the workflows and all of the buttons for all of the people, right? You can really sort of like have very modular software that fits your team, your workflows, have agents that understand your business specifically, and really sort of have this, really feel like something that you can own and deliver the value that you want without having to like download and then, sort of do all that work that you're doing because that specific button doesn't do the flow that you're doing. And so that productivity gain, right? You can really offload the work, from end to end, from fetching the data to doing the analysis to presenting it to run it every month to creating a deck to creating an Excel, like all to end in, just a few minutes. And that productivity gain is just, that's 10x. That's why we talk about 10x. It oftentimes
Mhm.
is a lot more than that because it's just a different way of working and you're making decisions. You're having agents really do the heavy lifting and you're operating at just such a faster clip. I mean, the other metric we look for is like how much more analysis are teams doing, right? Once they implement Concourse, how many more times can they think strategically about the business and say, well, what if we did this? What would that mean? Today, right? If you're working with software, like if that's not coded into the software, you can't do that. So you have to download all this data and then operating with it in spreadsheets. And then, you're still going to have to spend like days, weeks, months, right, to really think through that scenario. And so you might not just do that because that's like a lot of work and you've got other things going on. But Concourse can do that heavy lifting and allow you to think through the business more strategically, just so much faster.
Where would you say companies are seeing the most immediate wins with you guys? Like, is it month-end reports, or like where do you come in and they just go, "Oh, wow, that was amazing."
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. One of the things that, over the last few months that I've been sort of, pushing a lot of our customers is we have like, hundreds of ERPs that are connected into Concourse at this point, right? And, helping companies save money on vendors is like something that everyone should be doing in the first 5 minutes that they connect Concourse, right? The AI understands a lot of information about all your vendors, your spend, your patterns. It has context from the internet around what those means. It can read the invoices. So it can give you very deep insights on that. And so I think every CFO should be connecting their ERP into Concourse, asking the first question, like, how can I save, $50,000, $10,000,
Hmm.
right, in vendor spend, and give me the sort of recommended action items. That's something that, I think we're delivering value on that. I'm encouraging a lot of them to sort of ask that first question. And that's like, how can Concourse be ROI positive in the first 5 minutes that you've implemented that, right? Impossible to do this with software and really impactful for our teams just all around the world.
Nice. I've seen that you've got some Fortune 500 logos and customers and everything. Is there one that you want to highlight and the impact that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our largest customers is Palo Alto Networks, sort of 150 billion dollar sort of cybersecurity company. And so we help their team on the treasury side has probably been the most impactful work we've done around helping them think through their cash balances and bonds portfolios and how we can help them sort of automate a lot of the reporting that goes there, the dashboarding, right, and sort of the analysis that teams have to do across the sort of some 200 accounts that they have. But I think the really fun part is really helping them think through increasing, sort of their percentage cash invested, as well as sort of market yields, and how can we think through bond rotations, fallen angel analyses, cash pools, things like that. That's been really, really fun with like sort of immediate impact and ROI that the team can really feel.
Nice. And you have a wide range of who's an ideal prospect for you, right?
Yeah, we work with a lot of I'd say like sort of varied companies, from Fortune 500s and the Palo Alto networks of the world, as well as sort of like, single finance teams that are on QuickBooks and, Stripe and HubSpot and Ramp
Hmm.
and have sort of very basic, sort of or very common integrations. One of the things that we announced this year was a self-serve sort of option. And so if you want to use these agents that are pre-built on these common data sources, we've done a lot of the work of building the agents, right, already. And so there's a sort of like out of the box, extremely high accuracy, right, and sort of workflows that you can kind of get out of Concourse. And that has been a motion that's been sort of working really well for small teams that are super resource constrained, right? Might not have the headcount that they need, but want to be using really interesting AI, right? In a sandbox where accuracy, auditability, workflow, ROI sort of first, right? Finance, and they can build these agents themselves, and really kind of get off to the races. Like that's been, I think, really fun part of kind of like helping those teams as well move into the agentic first world, not just right the enterprises where we can come in and do a forward deploy motion and deploy these agents and have the impact and measure that, in the way that we do today, but really allowing anyone to sort of really have the right environment for finance, right, to sort of think about AI and adoption in a way that really drives results.
Nice. Well, how should people learn more? How can they engage and get more information?
Yeah, I mean, you can find us on, our website is concourse.ai. You can find us on LinkedIn. We post a lot of videos and sort of customer stories and talk a lot about agents and how the future of finance is going to look on Twitter as well. You can find me and Concourse there. But yeah, we love talking about the stories, the sort of impact. I think it's just a very interesting time in the world of AI, right? Again, software and AI, just completely different ways of interacting with data, and people are more and more, right, moving into that direction, choosing that. And we're sort of super excited about all the work we're doing within finance teams there.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, it's been really exciting learning about Concourse. I just look forward to watching your success and seeing lots of new logos come on board.
Yeah, that's the goal this year, and I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew.